Our next talk will be by Amy Carissa Oliver, who is online and will be telling us about proclamations as grassroots policy products in dark skies preservation. Amy, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you so much. And everyone, please forgive me. It's having a little bit of an internet connection issue this morning, so I'm not going to turn on my video, but it's also 4:30 in the morning in Arizona. Hi, Connie. So give me just 1 second to share and we'll get started. So I'm going to be talking about, well, first I'm going to start my presentation where it's supposed to start. I'm going to be talking about how the Dark Sky International Organization and I work together to start a program for proclamations. And I'll explain a little bit more about what those are in just a second. But they are a grassroots policy product for dark and quiet skies preservation. And we used them in this really unexpected way to help both engage the public and also create soft entry points with politicians and government leaders. This is me. So if you do not know what I look like already, there I am. There is my information. I am also the Public Affairs Officer and Government Affairs Officer at the Fred Lawrence Whipple Observatory, which is part of the Harvard Smithsonian collaboration at the Center for Astrophysics, and the chair of the Tucson and Pima County Outdoor Lighting Code Committee in Arizona. So basics of proclamations, what does that mean? It's an official announcement, as you can see on the screen, by a local or state, a local county or parish or a state or province. It can also be issued at a country level. In the United States, we do have those. At the country level, the White House can issue a proclamation. They have not done that yet for dark and quiet skies. In other countries, it may be called something else. So whatever your ceremonial document is called. In Mexico and Argentina, for example, it is called a declaración. So it's just got a little bit different name. There are some countries where it is called a ceremonial document, a celebratory document, a memorandum of celebration. And so it still has the same function. So again, it is a ceremonial document associated with an announcement on an event of importance. And in some countries, I'll talk about this in just a minute, we did have to ask for this to be created for the very first time. It's also a tool for education and awareness. As everyone in this room knows, sometimes starting the conversation about dark and quiet skies, about radio frequency interference, about light pollution with the community, and also with the government leaders who serve those communities can be very difficult. Regardless of the amount of science we bring to the table, hard factual science, this is happening in Arizona right now. Richard is there physically, Richard Green. So if you see him, you can ask him some questions about how we are dealing with this in Arizona physically on ground. It can be very difficult to have those conversations, and emotions and heated conversations can happen, or somebody may not take you seriously, but these are an extraordinarily powerful tool because what happens is they put information on the record. So the facts about light pollution or radio frequency interference go on the record. But it's really important to understand what they're not in that sense. So in some categories of government, a proclamation is a government document with power, but for this purpose, ceremonial documents don't have power. You cannot use them to enforce laws or ordinances, and you cannot, for example, you wouldn't be able to go to your neighbor or to a business and say you have to turn these off. We wouldn't be able to go to SpaceX and say you can't use your satellites in this frequency at all. That's not what these documents are for. They are, again, a very soft entry point. These are examples of what they look like. And these are, of course, from Colorado and from, I think, Texas. And so they look like this relatively everywhere in the world, some very simple, some very fancy. And how we go about getting these, and in the case of Dark Sky International, there is a group of advocates, so over 100 advocates participated in this work over the last 2 years to get these for International Dark Sky Week, and researching how to get in touch with local government offices who might handle a ceremonial document or someone who might be appropriate for that. There is a template for International Dark Sky Week, at least, and for proclamations, so that there isn't a ton of work to be done, because otherwise they can be quite laborious. I've been doing proclamations for all types of things that needed public attention for over 20 years. And then, of course, submitting them following the local government guidelines. And they are all different. There's not a one of them in the entire world that we have found that is the same as another. And so it was very important that we have a very coordinated effort amongst a lot of people to get this work done. So excuse the font change here for just a second. I don't know what's going on. So what do you do with a proclamation? So how we make use of these to make them work for us, to work for Dark and Quiet Skies, is by posting pictures of the final proclamation on social media, on the website, in the news, getting local news to cover it, to do an interview with whoever got the proclamation or a named organization within the proclamation. That's another amazing power of these documents, is that they heavily elicit the media to pay attention. We'll talk about that in just a second. As everyone in this room knows, the more that you get the media to pay attention, the more local government leaders will pay attention. And these are particularly useful in localities where the conversation has been a little bit more difficult to start. So where we are very lucky in Germany that the government is listening very well, in places where that's not the case, this is a really good way to start. And I should have mentioned that a government leader has to sign these proclamations to make them valid. They have to sign, stamp, date them. And so they go out into the world with their name already on them. And so it's a really excellent entry point to that conversation with them to get their full open public support. So when we did this for International Dark Sky Week, we started this in 2022. And we did an okay job. There were not a lot of advocates participating because it can feel a little overwhelming to start this process. We received 23 proclamations from state and local governments across the United States. And we leveraged that into 16 news stories and what in public relations we say 22.64 million reach. And if anyone has questions, I can explain what that means at the end. I won't take that time now. All right. And so this is sort of what it looked like. A lot of local media in the individual places, which is great to have that. So in Rapid City, having that news story, having that proclamation, it makes it much easier to go into a city council and get that work done at that lower level. But when we're trying to do this much bigger work, having country level support and much larger media involved is also important. So in 2023, we were aiming to have the advocates reach 100 proclamations, and we achieved, I think, 99. Ruskin Hartley is out there, and he can say whether that actually tipped over in the end over 100. It looks like it may have. Because we may have 20 from locations outside of the United States, including Mexico, Argentina, Australia, and our very first ever tribal nations proclamation. And this was a much bigger voice. We did much better training for advocates for how to speak to the media and how to pitch the media. And we were able to produce over 904 news stories with a potential reach of 1.295 billion. So of course that would be a little over 1/6 of the population of the planet. So that's why that number can sound a little bit strange. And this is what it looked like. So we reached more international news, big news, and really being able to reach the people who matter. So business leaders who have influence on governments, government leaders themselves, the types of publications they are reading. So very important to be able to have these conversations and also get this message out well around the world. So what? So as I said, I don't want to take too much more time here. Proclamations they're not that hard document that we're always looking for in science. It's not a code, it's not an ordinance, but it is a way to give a community ownership, getting people involved in the conversation, give them that ownership, help them to write a proclamation or put one out, lead that effort, and start that conversation, really truly start it with someone who has been difficult to reach. Grassroots work is very important when we're trying to make sweeping changes over large swaths of the government and large swaths of the world, because we need to have community support to get government support, because government leaders are in effect supposed to represent their constituents. And the louder the constituent population is, the more pressure there is, or guidance. I shouldn't say pressure, but it's sort of a mix of pressure and guidance for government leaders to make choices that reflect the ethos of the communities in which they serve. And so if we can use proclamations as a tool to do that, we can then also transfer them into that conversation. And it's a much easier conversation to start. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. I guess if I could ask a question. Amy, could you say a little more about the response and engagement you've gotten from government or even industry after the proclamations?
So as of right now, I've not heard that we've had a response from industry. However, a really great example of this was in 2022. Betty Maya Foot from Dark Sky International, who lives in Colorado part of the time, was able to use her proclamation for Colorado Springs as a springboard to her local government to start a conversation about changing the lighting code there. And there was also an excellent response in 2023 in Australia. And there were some provinces within Australia that participated in proclamations, and the leaders in those provinces started to ask questions of the advocates there. What does this mean? Why are you doing this? Come and talk to me more about this. And so it's very interesting to see that start to take place. We also saw very positive responses, although we didn't receive proclamations from these locations. New Zealand. So government offices in New Zealand have started asking questions of advocates living there. Because we made that request, they don't have an office to do proclamations there, so they actually have to create one just for this purpose. And so they've started asking more questions about it and how can they be more involved. And the same thing is also happening in Aruba. And so the mere action of asking for this type of document has started that effect. And so I need to do a little bit more follow-up work to find out how this has had long-term effects in other locations, particularly in the United States. It's a little bit easier to do that because we have so many of them, and they're working at local government levels, which can move a little bit faster, as everyone in here knows. Country level government doesn't move quite so fast. So getting things on an agenda and having a discussion about it takes a lot longer. at that level, but city and county level governments in the United States move on a quarterly basis usually, or a monthly basis. So we can now go back at this point. We're not quite a year out from the big push in 2023. Obviously, we're about 9 months out. So we can go back and see if we have made headway at this point. My cats are having a battle in the background. I'm sorry.